One of my resolutions for 2022 is to produce some short form videos on issues at the intersection of faith and public life. Now, some of you are probably thinking, Josh doing anything short form. I'm not sure how that's going to go. So at least they will be shorter form videos on some key issues in American public life. And so here's the first one. I want to talk a little bit about conversion therapy bans. Now, certainly these bans have been an issue in American public life for some time, but they really became kind of front and center, at least in my world, in the last couple of weeks, really December into January of 2022. So I want to talk about that, a little bit about what are these bans, and then what are the implications for the church's public witness? How should the church respond? And then what are the kind of common good thoughts? So we live in a society with others. We want to be good citizens, good neighbors. And so how does this affect us all? What are the common good implications concerning these bans? So I wanted to jump into that. So what is a conversion therapy ban? If you are unfamiliar, it's essentially a law or an ordinance that punishes or bans abusive and violent efforts to change someone's sexual orientation. That's been the very kind of traditional definition. The concern is that as time has gone on, that definition of conversion therapy has been expanded so far that it could be construed to mean any religious act that doesn't affirm an LGBTQ identity. And so the language has evolved, and the concern is that it can be construed very broadly to impact a Christian or religious sentiment that doesn't affirm an LGBTQ identity. According to LGBTmap.org, there are approximately 20 states in the United States and the District of Columbia that have such bans on the books. And notably, in December, Canada passed a conversion therapy ban that didn't just civilly punish someone that would do this, it actually criminalizes the act of conversion therapy. I believe it was 5 years for such an act, and then 2 years if you're promoting a practice, but definitely criminalizes the act. Now, a little bit of history is helpful in understanding, well, why are these laws on the books? Why are they being pushed right now? Is that there was a movement in the past, somewhat in the Christian church. Certainly there would be other efforts. It's often termed kind of reparative therapy. And the idea was that a minor or an individual would come in, express same-sex attraction, and the ministry effort was to get them to change from their same-sex attraction to have attraction towards the opposite sex. And there were abusive methods, just weird things like I've even heard of the use of heterosexual pornography to get somebody to like the opposite, be attracted to the opposite sex. And those efforts, they're done by different ministries. One name that comes up is Exodus International. Again, I don't know everything that Exodus International did, but it shut down in 2013. Another way I've heard it framed is kind of the pray the gay away type of movement. And importantly, I do not know of any major Christian organization that promotes that type of effort. In fact, the churches that I know of, if a minor were to come in and express same-sex attraction, they would tell them, we love you unconditionally. And the goal is not heterosexuality. Rather, the goal is to follow Jesus. Now, we will tell you what the Bible says about marriage, sex, and gender. And we believe that that's what is best for our lives. But the first thing we want you to do, most important thing, is to look to Christ. And so, again, I don't know of any major Christian organization practicing this sort of reparative therapy that was, I think, the target of the initial conversion therapy bans. So why am I talking about today? It's because there was a particular ordinance proposed in West Lafayette, which just for geographical purposes is near Purdue University. And in this particular conversion therapy ban, the language expanded beyond licensed professionals. Many of these laws have focused licensed professionals, though I think a licensed professional should be free to practice their profession according to their faith. But it goes beyond licensed professionals to impact unlicensed individuals. And then it defines conversion therapy this way. It's defined as any practice or treatment that seeks to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity, including efforts to change gender expressions or to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attractions or feelings towards individuals of the same gender. And I won't read the rest of the definition, but it goes on to exclude any effort to affirm. As long as you're affirming, it doesn't fall under conversion therapy. And so why am I raising this issue? The ordinance goes on to say that it shall be a violation of this ordinance for an unlicensed person to engage in conversion therapy with a minor person. Well, I've read the definition to you is very vague and ambiguous. I will actually link the entire ordinance so you can review it for yourself. But the concern is that this language is broad enough that it could apply to an unlicensed biblical counselor, to a pastor, and even a parent who is talking to a minor about the biblical sexual ethic. And the ordinance comes with a $1,000 fine per day for a violation. And so again, that's a gender conversion or a conversion therapy ban, and why I'm talking about it today. So how should the church respond to this? A couple of thoughts. Disagreement is not disrespect. This is a key thought. To dig into that a little bit. All people are made in the image of God and are worthy of equal dignity and respect. And as I've mentioned, there have been times in the past when the Christian church did not treat those in the LGBTQ community with the dignity of fellow image bearers. That's something I certainly will apologize for if I'm talking to someone in the LGBTQ community. However, disagreement on this issue is not disrespect. It's a different thing. Disagreement on this issue is not disrespect. And so a Christian simply promoting what the Bible says is true, good, and beautiful about human sexuality, about the fact that God created us as male or female, that is not disrespect. Now, certainly there'll be others on the other side that might disagree with that. However, it's important to note disagreement is not disrespect. It's also important to note that this is primarily, and again, I'm talking about the church, I'm talking about Christians. We should recognize this as primarily a worldview rather than partisan clash. So it's really easy for American Christians to kind of fall into political camps, political tribes. However, for the Christian looking at this, please understand this is much deeper than a party affiliation. And here's why. In the particular ordinance, which I encourage you to read, there are a set of resolutions, and there are often resolutions prior to an ordinance or a law. And the very first one, I can probably best describe as a secular statement of faith. It goes like this. Here's the exact statement. Contemporary science recognizes that being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender is part of the natural spectrum of human identity and is not a disease, disorder, or illness. All right, so that essentially is the secular statement of faith about the LGBTQ movement. I might, in a sense, propose what would the Christian response to that be? It might be something along these lines. Again, we're talking about this is a worldview clash, right? This is we're just understanding that there's a group of people that believe this to be fundamentally true about the world and reality, and then here's what Christians believe about that. So again, a Christian response to that statement might be something along these lines. God designed marriage to be a lifelong heterosexual union, and he created us as male or female as an expression of his image and nature. Living contrary to God's good design or finding our identity in anything but him will not lead to true freedom and flourishing, as attested by science, natural law, and the collective wisdom of the human experience. And so again, this is a worldview clash. We have to understand that's what's going on. And kind of the final thought under the church's public witness would be this, is that I encourage Christians to be confident that the biblical sexual ethic is both true and good for us, but also good for all people. And if you look in evangelical churches' statements of faith, most of them will have some statement along the lines of what I just shared. And so this is now the test of whether, do you believe it to be true, first of all? But then more importantly, do you believe it to be good and something that's worth standing for, something worth promoting in public life? So I encourage Christians to be confident of that. And then how about the common good? All right, so we've talked about what should the church's response be, but we certainly live in a society with a lot of non-Christians. And so what about the common good? What about the good for all people? So a couple thoughts along these lines. I've always wondered, or I had a question, whenever I'm looking at legislation, even pieces of legislation that I might promote in my capacity as an attorney. Good question here. Should we pass laws that are solutions in search of a problem? Should we pass laws that are a solution in search of a problem? And in the particular ordinance that I've mentioned today, there are 2 pages of resolutions stating why it's an important idea. But absent from those resolutions is any mention of a rash of licensed or unlicensed individuals providing reparative therapy in the jurisdiction of the city council. I don't see any mention of that. And so if there is not a problem with it, then if we're passing a law, there's not, and that's not the problem, then it seems to indicate that the target of the law might be individuals. And again, I'm not impugning the city council or saying this is what they're thinking. It just raises the question. If there is not a particular problem with reparative therapy being practiced, then why are we passing it if not to affect Christians or people of other faiths that are living out their faith and promoting that to their kids? And that's the next issue that I would mention, is that this ordinance and ordinances like it actually hinder the diversity that they claim to promote. All right, so we want a diverse society, something we hear all the time. And one of the issues with this ordinance is that the belief that I've just described about marriage and about sex, gender, is not something just held by Christians. It is a belief held by Buddhists, Jews, and Muslims. Now, of course, there'd be different sects of these faiths, but historic iterations of these faiths have held something very similar to the Christian sexual ethic. And so are we going to say to a society that we're promoting diversity, if we're saying, well, if you hold to these faiths, then you can't be a licensed counselor, and you can't even in an unlicensed setting talk to a minor about these issues without fear of running afoul of this ordinance and being hit with $1,000. So should we pass laws, and this is just a question, that are solutions in search for a problem? This ordinance hinders the diversity it claims to promote. And then this ordinance has serious implications for free speech, really on both sides. So if you followed these conversion therapy bans, you may know that the 11th Circuit, which would be Florida, Georgia, Alabama, the 11th Circuit actually struck down one of these conversion therapy bans that applied to professional licensed therapists. And this is what the 11th Circuit said: we understand and appreciate that the therapy is highly controversial, but the First Amendment has no carve-out for controversial speech. We hold that the challenged ordinances violate the First Amendment because they are content-based regulations of speech that cannot survive strict scrutiny. So understand what the ordinance does. It's saying to someone, you cannot say a particular viewpoint, which is, it goes right against the grain of the First Amendment. And I would note that if the conversion therapy ban, which I've mentioned, passes strict scrutiny, the argument could be, and just a second, let me explain. The argument would be that an ordinance that says that a therapist may not affirm a minor in a conversation about LGBTQ issues, that would also pass scrutiny. Now, that's political, cultural issues aside. I'm not promoting that law, to be very clear. I am not promoting that law. I'm just saying that legally, if you can pass a bill banning conversations about LGBTQ issues and not affirming it, then theoretically a law that says you may not talk about it also would pass legal scrutiny. So sometimes when we rush to pass ordinances, we really have to think about the implications, and the implications for free speech here are just profound. And this really comes to the heart of the matter, right? That we live in a society in which there are Orthodox Christian believers that believe what I've stated about human sexuality and sex/gender. And certainly there are members of the LGBTQ community that believe what they believe very strongly, believe it to be best for all people. And so how are we going to live and thrive together? And that's why in public life, we have to recognize, I think, that worldview clash, and punishing those that disagree with us on these issues, I don't think is the way forward. So I believe a better way forward is that we should all be free to believe and live out our deeply held convictions without coercion or mistreatment by the government. That'll be kind of the final word. I believe that we should be free to live out our deeply held convictions without coercion or mistreatment by the government. So that's a primer on conversion therapy bans, I think how it affects the church's public witness, and then some common good implications. And that is our kind of shorter form video for today, and your thoughts welcome.